A couple of questions that came up, and I don't know if that's for Mark or you, Catherine, but both please intervene. There's a question about, is there also a gender gap in terms of the salary in this profession of public affairs communications, as there is in other professions?
Yes, so perhaps I'll take a stab at that. I've actually studied that particular question and written about it. So again, I urge you to look at the website for some of our reports. I'm afraid to say, yes, there is a salary gap. The good news is it generally doesn't exist at the junior to mid-level, but at, say, head of EU affairs, even head of European associations, there is a gap of around 15–16%, which is actually, funnily enough, the EU average gender gap. Why that is, I can't give you an answer. What I can tell you is that in my personal experience of recruiting many hundreds of people, there's never been any conscious differentiation between men and women in determining the pay level. If I might take a stab at why, the reasons for gender pay gap are complex, and some people have even observed that it starts early in childhood, where girls on average receive less pocket money than boys. So this is a problem that's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and it's going to take a while to fix. But I think the good news is that certainly my clients are very sensitive to it, very conscious of it now. And it's not just about salary pay gap, it's also about diversity in some of the top jobs. And the higher up you go in the food chain, you'll tend to see less women, I'm afraid to say, even though I would say public affairs is a relatively gender balanced profession up till the most senior levels, but certainly junior to mid-level, it's pretty gender balanced. So there is an issue there, and certainly I must say I make a conscious effort of including as many smart women as I can into my long lists and short lists, and happily there's lots to choose from in Brussels. I do think there's an issue of confidence, I think, and this has come up in several fora that I've held where I've been the only man in a room of about 30 or 40 women. Be a little bit intimidating. I can felt it the other way around, but this has been the main subject that's been discussed, and it can be a barrier to women's advancement in the workplace and perhaps to salaries. And so I think, you know, to Catherine's point, skills can be learned, and I think confidence, as some respective assertiveness can be learned as well. So this is something that women can work on, and hopefully over time it can be addressed to get a fairer situation.
Confidence, yes, it can be increased, and typically when let's say, I'm caricaturing here, right, so generalizing, but when men see a CV, if they can fill about 60–70% of the skills, they would go like, yeah, I can do this. A woman, if she can't meet at least 90%, she will go like, nah, that's not for me. So I think women have to learn being more assertive and thinking, okay, 60–70%, I can do this. It's a cultural thing, it's educational, it's societal, so it's a big let's say it's a big subject. It will take some time. Yeah.
Thank you. A couple of more questions related to social media platforms, particularly LinkedIn. There's a question, I'm not sure I understand it fully, but do I need to use LinkedIn as a monitoring tool in my talent expertise? So I'm not sure whether it's to look for a job or to promote your own skills. Anybody wants to take that?
I guess I can take a first stab at that. So I guess one basic point is LinkedIn is not Facebook, and I must say I'm a bit shocked sometimes. I've seen some public affairs people. There's one public affairs person I'm thinking of particularly, who I shall not name and shame now, but who constantly posts photos of themselves in strange locations, and it's obviously LinkedIn is not about that. I've also I think we've all seen them, you know, too many of these posts saying, you know, I got my 25-meter swimming badge or something, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, but very small personal victories. And I think it is a kind of sort of look at me and look at what I've done. and it's not really relevant for the wider viewership. So I think in terms of your personal brand, you do need to be very careful about what you post on LinkedIn, because it does reflect on you, and it's archived, right? People can always see it, and they might comment on it, and or you know, do whatever with it. So do be careful of LinkedIn. It's a potentially dangerous platform. I try and tell my teenage daughter as well to be careful what she posts on social media as well, because all of this stuff is stored in a big database somewhere, right? It might come back and haunt you later. So be careful on LinkedIn. As a monitoring tool, yeah, it's interesting. Yesterday, I noticed that LinkedIn is sending me a weekly news report, so a bit like Google News, like a news alert, and it's curated with an editor, etc. So I suspect Microsoft is investing in that to compete with Google and become an alternative news source. And it's interesting. I guess there's some smart AI tool behind it, but the news is very tailored to my interests. So I guess if you're talking about that using as a monitoring tool, yes, and I guess if there's a way to tick box your preferences, yes, that could be another channel for you. And it's on important subjects, right, that affect your career. But other than that, I think for most of you, it's basically an online CV. So I think, you know, you do the best you can in regard to that, and experiment a little bit. Put some posts up there. I've some of my posts get a few thousand people, and some I've had like 80,000 views on my post, which I was struck by. Sometimes you just capture the interest of people at exactly the right time. So have fun with it, but be careful.
I would like to add perhaps one aspect when it comes to LinkedIn, because I tell my clients is of real importance, and this is first of measuring a network. So it's still here in Brussels, and I think in Geneva as well, used to see with whom a person is in exchange. And I think therefore LinkedIn is of special importance. The second thing is you're able to describe a little bit what you're doing, because not always your title already shows, or the company title shows what you're exactly doing. So especially if you think of perhaps changing sectors, it can be interesting of really, as Mark said, trying to a little bit with different language, with different words, just to describe what you're doing.
There's an extension to this question around personal branding. Is it important nowadays for public affairs professionals to be also on other channels like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, apart from LinkedIn?
Well, I can take a short answer to that. I think other social media tend to be a little bit more social, although Twitter obviously is a very useful lobbying tool. So I don't think Twitter is a great tool to necessarily enhance your career, although you could probably destroy your career if you put the wrong thing on Twitter, I suppose. But I would urge you to think of Twitter as a lobbying way to get into someone's computer screen and have a one-on-one relationship with someone potentially a very high level who might be difficult to access. I think Facebook, the lines seem to be blurring a little bit, I must say, between Facebook and private and personal lives, and I'm getting lots of Facebook requests these days for people I barely know, I guess for professional reasons, and then that makes you a little bit more guarded about who's a friend and who are acquaintances and those kind of questions. And Instagram is a whole other ball game. So I think for the subject of this webinar was advancing your career. I think for now, really focus on LinkedIn. Although in some markets there are other tools, right? Barbara, in Germany, I think it's fair to say Zing is a very important tool, and there must be others in other countries. I don't know them so well, but LinkedIn is the biggest by far.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question going back to salary. We'll take it now. How do I know if the salary I'm asking for is well within the average for that job? Basically, how do I know if I'm underpaid?
That's a very good question. Oh dear, right, where do I start? So underpaid, well, underpaid for the job, maybe not, because that may be only what your employer can afford, right? Maybe underpaid compared to your peers in other sectors. And as I come back to what I said earlier, is there's often no logic to why some organizations pay high salaries. I mean, for instance, I knew one global head of a public affairs function working for a Fortune 500 company. He earned 70,000 euros gross per year, and he came to me and said, "Do you think I'm underpaid?" And I said, "Hell yeah! I mean, 70,000 for a major company? You're nuts." but he'd grown up within this organization and he didn't have any comparisons, so he found some of my reports rather useful. I think, you know, in the chatter with your peer group, and looking at our reports, you'll get a sense of what are bands, but it really depends on what your organization can afford. I can tell you, as headhunters, we will often know the magic number. We will often know what the band is, and usually we're told that for this specific job, we're prepared to pay 150 to 250,000 euros, but it really depends on the candidate. And really, the game is from the employer is to pay put it bluntly, pay the least for the best talent, right? And your game as a candidate is to get the most. So somewhere you meet, and that's why I was talking about negotiating what is a fair salary for your experience and the value that you will bring to an organization. But I think you can always ask, and people can refuse to tell you, of course, but I think it's a reasonable question to ask what sort of salary. I mean, I must admit, when I was the other end of headhunters, I would always ask, you know, so how much does this pay roughly? Because it's an immediate disqualifier. No one wants to be paid less, right? You always want to be paid more. I tend to tell my clients that if you want to attract someone from one job to your job, you should expect to pay a 10 to 20% premium, sometimes more, for a few reasons. One is the organization might make a counter offer. And two, it needs to be attractive because, you know, you're going through a big change. A candidate is making a big leap into the unknown. But I could go on for a long time. I suggest you read our reports, and if you still feel you're underpaid, send me an email and we can have a little offline chat on that one.
Yeah, I've collated some of the questions which will need to be addressed by the three of you, so I won't pick anyone, so feel free to jump in. There's one question around nationality, and do people present themselves differently according to their nationality, due perhaps to, you know, the educational system or else, or culture? Does it matter?
I can give one answer, which is perhaps not what you're looking for, but I think nationality does matter, particularly when you're applying for companies. And sometimes I hear unrealistic views about this. So, for instance, German companies will tend to hire German public affairs people. French companies will tend to hire French public affairs staff because it's a corporate function and it's the language of the corporate headquarters. So if you're Italian, it's going to be hard to work for a German company unless you're absolutely fluent in German, I would say, and you're very culturally sensitive to that culture. However, you could apply for an American company because actually American companies care less about your nationality and more about your ability, your personality, your skills and your knowledge, some of the things that we've been talking about. UK companies, interestingly, are very open to hiring non-Brits these days, perhaps more so now than ever for obvious reasons. In fact, Northern Europe it tends to be that way. I worked for a Danish company once who said, hire me anybody but not a Dane, because they were looking for diversity in their public affairs team. So nationality can be a factor there in the corporate setting. I would say in European associations, it's not so much of a factor. Although being an EU citizen is increasingly important, and you know what I mean there by what's the EU and what's not the EU. And in consultancies, again, I don't think that matters so much. It's more about your ability, and at the higher levels, it's about new business. So nationality does matter for corporate public affairs, but I think there are perhaps other views on that subject.
I can perhaps add one aspect. I think there are differences, and I think they come from different sources. So I think it's the educational system. And there it only depends on whether there's a fit in between the HR person, the recruiter, and the candidate, because there are differences in the system. I think also there are differences in between new EU member states, which are not that new anymore these days, but still, and the old member states of the EU. So what I work on a regular basis, especially with candidates from new EU member states, is like this, daring to stand up for their interests. And I think this is really of utmost importance to find a level, an eye level for everyone here. And I think there I see still a difference in between people coming from the traditional EU member states and the new EU member states. There's
a question around age as well. How can you make your case around your value if you're under 30 or just above 30, based on the results, not so much the age, which seems to be directing a bit the position that you're applying for and the salary as a consequence.
I can take a first stab at that, and actually I want to answer or to just discuss something that Barbara mentioned earlier, which is relevant to that. Motivation. I just want to really emphasize what Barbara said about motivation. I read a piece of research somewhere that said it's the #1 reason people get jobs. And I must admit, when I'm sitting on the client side and we're interviewing candidates, sometimes very, very senior candidates who should know better, it's motivation is the distinguishing factor. It's the one candidate that really wants that job, and it's so clear in the way that they've researched that organization and the passion that comes across in why they really want that job. One of the worst turnoffs, and I've heard it so many times, it's crazy, is when I ask a senior person, why do you want this job? They'll say, well, I don't like my current job. No, sorry, that's wrong, beep, and that's a bad answer. So I just really want to emphasize what Barbara was saying about motivation. It's really, really important. And a little headhunter's tip is those motivation letters, sometimes I will cut and paste a sentence or two from there if they're very well written, because they encapsulate exactly what that person's about and what they want, and I'll paste it in my candidate notes, and I'll let the client know, because as you say, they may not have read that in the rush to interview candidates. Age. So I've seen a graph where salary increases with age very, very fast, and then it kind of plateaus at about 40, and then even starts diminishing at a certain point. I don't know in today's world or the world of the future whether it will stay like that graph, but probably. So yes, I'm afraid there is a relationship between career progression and less age. I think it's years of experience, and the more experience you have, the richer and deeper experience you have, the more valuable you can be for your organization. But I would say, lucky you're in public affairs, and I see so many opportunities for young people to advance ahead of their time. I mean, if you're a lawyer, you have to really do the hard yards. You have to go through years and years before you become partner. In public affairs, you can be very, very lucky. I mean, take my own example. I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. At 26 years old, I was the #2 at Hill & Knowlton, and I happened to be headhunted to start ABCO, age 26 years old, and I ran that for a long time. So, you just can be in the right place at the right time. There's lots of Secretary Generals I've met who are, Catherine, how old were you when you were a Secretary General for the first time? I think in your late 20s?
29.
29, there you go. So these kinds of amazing opportunities don't tend to happen in other professions. So lucky you. So, stick at it, be motivated, do your best job, get the richest experience you can, and I think you'll find you can progress very, very fast.
And luck is preparation, if I may say. Yes, luck is preparation and being at the right time and showing up, Woody Allen said.
I want to perhaps also add one element. I think it's also about demonstrating why you have the experience even though you are younger, because it really depends on your CV as well. Some young people start with 15-year-old in some role in an organization, in an NGO or somewhere else. So really try to show why this age doesn't matter in your specific case. I don't think it's only luck, if we see here. So I think there might be a bit of opportunity in there, but it's really describing how you can show that you have experience as well, perhaps in another way than others.
Thank you, Barbara. I'll take the questions randomly now. Any of the three of you have advice on how to maintain or expand your professional network at this particular moment where there is social distancing, less meetings? So how do we do this?
Is more online presence. At the beginning of the crisis, we were much more online than we'd ever been. Also, I realized that what would have been in the past a phone call is now a video call, which makes it much more personable. Okay, it's not as good as the real thing, but it's better than a phone call. So online presence, more video calls and emails. I mean, each channel for a particular objective.
Perhaps I may jump into here, and I think it's also using and being creative about the possibilities. For example, Zoom is offering. I think it's difficult to do really one video conference after the other, but if you think about how to replace a beer on Place Luxembourg with someone I want to meet, so really be creative about how can I address this to this person in a virtual context. And I see with my clients that there are really creative possibilities. So really say, okay, we do an apéro together and you invite 2 or 3 people, then it becomes more interesting. But trying to use this tool because it makes people also more flexible, because they can take care of their boss on the phone at the same time with having an apéro with you. So I think seeing the opportunity behind is also something. I think we always have a negative view on this new COVID world, but I think there are opportunities in there as well.
And we have somebody who's over 50-year-old, and he's asking, or she's asking, what are the job prospects for over 50s in the Brussels bubble?
I can take a stab on that. Well, I think we're still in public affairs where experience is generally valued. So you're not over the hill when you're 50. Glad to say I'm over 50 myself. I think some of the other people on this call are too. And hopefully our clients value our experience still. So it's not necessarily a problem. I think you were saying earlier, Barbara, it's about constant education. You need to reevaluate and refresh constantly. So you do need to learn some new tricks, whether that be understanding comatology better, learning how to use Twitter, etc. So you do need to keep your tools sharp, because one thing for sure is that you'll have younger competitors for your jobs who are more attuned to those things. But it doesn't tend to be a major factor, and in some jobs it's actually an advantage, I would say. Some jobs, dare I say it can be a disadvantage.
Okay. Of course, if you have ageism and rigid thoughts like I don't want to hire anybody over 40, there's not much you're going to be able to do. I just think that beliefs are important, and if you believe that you add value to this particular job, then you should forget about your age and your gender and just go for it. That's my take on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree on this, and I think it's really about attitude. So forgetting about this factor of age, once you are convinced you can do this job, and then finding the reasons why you are perhaps even better than the younger candidate. And I think this can be network, this can be experience, this can be having seen different sectors, etc.
Thanks, Barbara. We've got 10 minutes, 9 minutes to take on the last few questions, so I'll shoot them at you. Is there a way to proactively get on a headhunter's talent pool?
I guess I better answer that one. First of all, I think let's take a step back and remind ourselves that headhunters are not the first way that people get jobs. So I would say certainly, for instance, in Brussels, where we are a bubble of 25,000 practitioners, word of mouth still tends to be the primary way that people get new jobs. So if you want a new job, let it be known, discreetly perhaps, so your current employer doesn't know, that you are open to new opportunities. And that comes back to the self-reflection that Barbara and Catherine were talking about. Once you've realized you're looking for a new job, things start happening and you start interacting with people in a different way, and you look at all the different conversations you have in a new light. So once you've made that decision, I think about word of mouth primarily. Secondly, many jobs, probably most jobs, are advertised these days. So whether that's on LinkedIn, Euro Brussels, Euractiv, etc., a lot of interesting jobs are advertised there every week. So the obvious point is, subscribe to those emails, look there. Now, headhunters are probably the third way that organizations recruit. We are brought in for many different reasons. So for corporate searches, sometimes it happens that companies have tried for a year or 2 years to fill a job, and their HR people based in Boston have no idea what a Brussels lobbyist is like. So out of desperation, they talk to us, and we nail it. So knowing a headhunter in that kind of circumstance can be obviously useful. There are directories of headhunters. I think you're better off talking to the specialist ones. Some headhunters have a no walk-in policy, which means don't call us, we'll call you. I'm always interested in meeting first-class top people because that's what we are hired to do. But my restriction is time, and we are paid to look for candidates, not give career coaching. So I always need to balance time with that. But I mean, there are specialist public affairs headhunters in Brussels. You can find out who they are with Google, etc. And perhaps being on the radar of the more specialist ones who have the best briefs is a good thing to do.
There's a question on a different topic, but which goes back a bit to the interviewing process. How would you react in an interview situation where you're asked to present your action plan on a particular case? What is the limit between job interview and free consultancy? I'm quite senior, hence the question.
Okay, I'll answer that. So I think you should be as open as possible and don't worry about consultancy because what are you trying to hide? And I don't believe anything you say in an interview is so valuable that you have to charge for it. So, and in fact, I've heard that the other way around, that I've heard clients who are looking to hire people and the people they're talking to have been so guarded and wanted to, you know, keep it. I mean, confidentiality is one thing, and I think people understand and respect that, but not wanting to give something because they feel like they're giving away free advice and something that should be paid for is a big turnoff. And I can think of specific examples where clients of mine said, I don't want to work with that person. I'm not going to hire that person because they were almost asking for money or something. So you must never create that impression. And I think within the bounds of confidentiality, be as open and honest as possible. That always goes down well.
How difficult nowadays is it to change sector? Or even department within an organization, because there are always these restrictions coming from either HR, your potential boss, that you're too specialized. So are these skills transferable, and how do you make the case? And I guess I'm addressing that to the coaches as well.
So I think there are a lot of transferable skills, first of all. So if we really go back to, you work for a certain sector and you need certain very specific knowledge there. But apart from that, understanding the institutional Brussels, as Mark mentioned, the comitology, understanding on the different instruments of communicating, for example, all this is a transferable skill. And I think what I see in motivation letters, for example, sometimes it's lacking a real description of these sorts of skills, because everyone is putting, I'm a quick learner and I adapt fast to new content. And if this is really true, then it shouldn't be a problem to change from one material to the next. Especially in, like, if we bear in mind the European Commission is doing that like on an ongoing 5-year basis, and in a way it not always works, but it works pretty often. And I think we should, especially in Brussels, really motivate people to do this, because it can be a learning curve, it can be inspiring, and you can bring a fresh view from external side, plus the knowledge which is transferable.
I very much agree with Barbara's point, and there's been this discussion around between should you be a sector specialist or should you be a lobbying specialist? And obviously, to Barbara's point, there are skills, specific skills as a lobbyist. Obviously, you're an influencer, and on the other hand, sectors can be learned about, I think. What you need to show is your curiosity and willingness to learn, basically.
In associations, for instance, I would say it's easier to switch sectors because there are some common skill sets. I mean, Catherine, you've gone from the vending sector to the airport security sector, but because you have the basic skills and knowledge about lobbying, communications, running a small business effectively, and keeping your members happy, and those are easily transferable skills. It's much harder in companies, in my experience. So pharmaceutical companies, for instance, really want pharmaceutical people. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with the CEO of a top pharma company, and I hired their top lobbyist. And I said, you know, can I have someone from medtech, for instance? He said, not really. I don't want anybody learning my sector on the job. So even medical devices was not close enough, because the fires that were burning were so big and fast that they didn't want anybody learning on the job. And I think it's fair to say that certain highly regulated sectors like pharmaceuticals, like financial services, increasingly technology, etc. You know, the language of that takes quite a long time to learn. And I think right now, I mean, look, we're in the middle of a crisis. So I think clients' tolerance for people learning that on the job is relatively low. So it depends. Consultancies, again, they're often looking for generalists, but clients are looking for expertise. So it really depends.
And I wanted to thank you, Catherine, Barbara, Mark, and Natalia.